that's the crazy thing here. If the world really started in 4004 BC, as Bishop Ussher said, I think it was
Right.
October 23rd at 6 p.m.
Right.
He went through the Bible and he came up with that's when it happened. Then we know a lot about the history of the universe. But if you say, it was really 4,000,000,004 BC, that changes things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how anybody can think that nobody got to our level of technology, as small as it may be compared to others, before we did, is absurd.
Yeah.
Oh, and everywhere, you realize 80 years ago we didn't know if there are any other planets in any other solar system besides here. Now, practically every place we look, even though our techniques still need some massaging, we find planets. Well over 450 exoplanets have been discovered. They're all over the place, and that's only the big ones because our techniques don't yet give us information on the smaller ones, but the Kepler space satellite and TERPS, there's a couple of other ones. Kepler's up there and working, looking at a small region of space very carefully, and it's going to be grinding out data for years and all kinds of planets. What I'm saying is we have no reason at all to think that we're in the elite. As a matter of fact, with our short history, I'd say we're at the bottom of the barrel, not at the top.
Yeah.
And so, why would aliens treat us as equals? We don't know that there hasn't been contact.
Yes, exactly.
But, where do we stand on a galactic neighborhood level?
Mm-hmm.
We're nobodies. We haven't left the solar system yet. I get a real kick out of Dr. Tyson from the Hayden Planetarium, who says, our fastest craft is the Voyager spacecraft, and it would take 70,000 years to get to the next nearest star.
Right.
And, so it's impossible.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a propulsion system on it.
Mm-hmm.
Throw a bottle in the ocean and tell me how long it takes to cross the ocean.
Exactly. I think with every consecutive census that takes place on whether or not people believe in extraterrestrial intelligence, and even further that they've visited Earth, the numbers keep growing and growing. It's obvious something's taking place. We're all scrambling to figure out what that is and how we fit into the picture. That's for sure. I want to get back to Roswell real quick, because I want to talk about the uncovering of evidence that 2 bodies were discovered and possibly a second crash site.
Well, there's more than that, really. At the very same time, roughly, that Bill Moore and I were working on the basic Roswell story, I had heard at a lecture up in Bemidji, Minnesota, somebody came up to me afterward and asked if I'd ever heard anything about a crash of a saucer in New Mexico. I said, well, yes, we were just beginning our research. Tell me more. And the story they told me had to do with a guy named Barney Barnett over in the plains of San Augustine, which is well west of Roswell, near where the Very Large Array Radio Telescope is now, incidentally. Really in the middle of nowhere. The least populated, lowest population density of any county in New Mexico, Catron County. And there was a crash there, and that craft was essentially intact with some bodies outside it.
Wow.
And as a matter of fact, this year there will be a new book out, the Aztec incident, Aztec, New Mexico. It's up in the northwest corner in the Four Corners area. That happened in March of 1948.
You're kidding.
One was recovered, and there were bodies inside, and it was carted off, and a guy named Scott Ramsey and his wife Suzanne have spent a ton of money and time and energy and effort and done a real bang-up job on researching that case. And I've read most of their new book. There's one more trip they have to make. I'll be writing the forward for it, but I'm very impressed. So there have been a number of crashes, and as a matter of fact, there's a book, Witness to Roswell, which has a story that was published only after Walter Howe, who I mentioned before,
Mm-hmm.
Who was the base public information officer. Before he died, he signed an affidavit that had been prepared by people who had interviewed him several times to be released only after his death. And he said that there was a third crash, Roswell, closer to town, It happened while Jesse Marcel took us up to Fort Worth, Texas, and where General Ramey said, told the press, just a radar reflector weather balloon combination, and left Jesse sort of holding the bag on that one. He couldn't say anything. Anyway, there was a crash that day closer into town, and bodies were recovered there too. So we don't know how many crashes there have been. I guess their zero defects program doesn't work a heck of a lot better than ours. And let me get rid of an argument that's made, a silly argument. How could somebody come from light years away and with advanced technology and crash? That makes no sense. I try to point out that none of the crashes of which I'm aware anyway are of very large objects. We have many reports of so-called motherships. Case up in the Yukon, very well investigated, where the object was between 0.6 and 1.2 miles long. That's big. We have the Japan Airlines encounter with something up there over Alaska that was twice the size of an aircraft carrier. So what I'm saying is the physical trace cases are almost always produced by little guys, 30, 40, 50, 60 feet. And there's a direct analogy here. The United States Navy has these huge nuclear-powered aircraft carriers that can go for 18 years without refueling, and which are big, and they carry about 75 little airplanes that can go for 2 hours maybe without refueling.
Right.
And so the ones that are crashing are not the ones who came here directly from another star system. They were the equivalent of the jets on board the nuclear-powered carrier. There's nothing unusual or crazy or anything like that about that situation. So don't tell me that it's advanced technology, they couldn't crash if they came here from another star. Nobody said they did.
Right.
They were carried here.
Good point.
Not the same thing.
Very good point. So the story is just so massive, Roswell. It's so huge. Listen, I'd stay here and talk with you about that all day long. It's just such a huge story. But I want to get to your book, Science Was Wrong, co-authored with Kathleen Marden. What's the premise here, and what are your most favorite and fantastic stories that you two have uncovered?
Well, the premise here is that when you look carefully at progress in various areas of technology and medicine and so forth, you find that very often progress was delayed by the resistance of very well-known, very smart people who said it was impossible. And the British Astronomer Royal in 1956 said space travel was utter bilge. Who would spend the money and what good would it do you, et cetera, et cetera. That meant people were unwilling. I mean, this is the British Astronomer Royal, mind you, to stick their necks out and look at things seriously. Goddard, after whom the Goddard Space Center was named, early pioneer in rocketry, was vilified viciously. The New York Times said he doesn't even know what the average high school student knows about rockets can't work in a vacuum. They need something to react against. They said that in like 1921, and they corrected it when Apollo was on the way to the moon. The exhaust reacts against the rocket, not against the surroundings.
Right.
There were aviation, all kinds of people. The top astronomer in the United States, a couple of months, I guess it was October, before the Wright brothers' first flight, said he was absolutely certain that no combination of technology, et cetera, could ever be used for a man to fly. And the thing is, when people like that speak out, it keeps down interest in the subject, keeps people from opening their mouth, doing the research. Billy Mitchell, general, flew in France during World War I. After the war, was saying that flight is going to change everything when it comes to warfare, and talked about sinking ships with bombs dropped from airplanes. And the Secretary of the Navy says, I'll stand on any battleship. That's ridiculous. And as a matter of fact, there's a further illustration of that. In the Army-Navy football game program, in November 29th, 1941, there was a picture of the USS Arizona, this massive battleship. And nobody has ever sunk a battleship from the air, which actually wasn't true, but anyway, that's what they said. And 8 days later was Pearl Harbor. And 1,100 men died on board the Arizona.
Unbelievable.
And so we have, in medicine, one of my favorite stories is that of Ignaz Semmelweis. To make a long, exciting, interesting, fascinating story short, discovered he was helping deliver babies at a big lying-in hospital in Austria, and or not Austria, Budapest, I'm sorry. He found that the babies being delivered by midwives, only 1 or 2% of the women developed childbed fever, which was usually fatal. But the ones being delivered by the residents and the doctors, 20% did. And it happens they were doing autopsies and then examining people without washing their hands. Because the mark of a good doctor was how bloody his apron was, you know.
Right.
And Semmelweis set up programs. It's a long, fascinating story. And unfortunately, the boss of the hospital said that's not the way we do things. Even though Semmelweis succeeded in bringing the percentage getting childbed fever down to 1 or 2% to match the midwives from 20%. Like I said, it was invariably fatal.
Exactly.
He wound up being forced out of the hospital.
Wow.
And thousands of women died because the doctor resisted because he knew better. That's not how we do things. The strong resistance to vaccination against smallpox. Thousands of people died because some smart people said stupid things. So there are a lot of stories like this. I talk about global warming. We each did 7 chapters, so not that we didn't each read the others, but we each did 7 under our leadership, so to speak. And there have been some dumb things said about global warming by smart people who want us to spend hundreds of billions of dollars. The world hasn't warmed in 14 years. This is the planet. It doesn't mean the climate doesn't vary, change, etc. Fredericton had the warmest April in ages, maybe ever. But of course, talk to the people in New Jersey and Washington, D.C. about their snowfall this past winter.
Yeah.
You know?
Honestly.
So there are a lot of places where you find that people are speaking out where they really don't know what they're talking about, and where they've stood in the way of progress. An English inventor got a patent on a jet engine in 1930, but strongly resisted. Gas turbines are much too heavy to be used in airplanes. German inventor got a patent several years later, but the Germans built the first jet-powered airplane. What if England had developed those earlier?
Right.
A lot of the destruction during World War II have been avoided. You know, so these stands taken by smart people saying stupid things can be of great significance. And, you know, how many areas are we dealing with today where it's the same kind of thing, where progress isn't being made because of the resistance from the old line, if you will. Lord Kelvin said X-rays, when he first heard about that, was a fraud. A fraud. He didn't know anything about them, but he knew it couldn't be, because if it had been real, he would have known about it.
Right.
So we touch on a lot of these. Some are touching stories. The hemophilia holocaust, one doctor said the chance of getting AIDS from blood products is 1 in a million. Keep treating things the way you've been doing. 10,000 American hemophiliacs were made HIV positive.
Unbelievable.
By bad blood. And there were Red Cross people who took the bad stuff and sent it out to other hospitals. Even though it was known that heat treatment would take care of the problem. So, in other words, keeping your eye open for false claims of impossibility